Stay tuned for another lesson on the fruit of the Spirit. Lesson number 8, faithfulness, a fruit of the Spirit. The lexicographer there says about the word that is used here in Galatians 5 and 23 that we translate faithfulness means the character of one who can be relied upon. And so if we think about that for just a moment, what God is seeking to develop in us is a character upon which he can rely. And that says a lot about God's interest in us. You know, it is difficult to say that any one of the fruit of the Spirit is more important than any of the others. But if they were, these last three might rise to be the most important. You see, unless we are willing to be a new person, to be someone other than who follows the desires prompted by the enticements of our fleshly, carnal nature, then we just may not care about those other relationships with God or with other people, unless, of course, in some way it works to our advantage. And then, that is just simply satisfying one of those desires of the flesh. We are simply trying to do something that pleases us. And those fleshly desires are what got us into trouble to begin with. They are the very things that ruin the totality of our relationships, whether with God or with other people, and then even with ourselves. We can notice just a few verses earlier than those containing that list of that fruit that the Spirit would seek to produce in believers and followers of Christ. We find that same Spirit directing the Apostle Paul wrote about the works of the flesh. And he said, that's fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, sorcery. But he also said it's enmities, it's strife, it's jealousies, it's wraths, it's factions, it's divisions, it's heresies. And so those are the kinds of things that most certainly step in and ruin relationships, aren't they? So we must acceptantly allow the Spirit to do his work in us and with us, that those Christ-like qualities may be in our life. Therefore, as God is faithful, then we must let that Spirit integrate that quality of faithfulness into our life as well. And we see that God, in a sense, is saying we can do it. Well, certainly God is pulling for us. That's why he reveals these things, and that's why he speaks of the tools that can equip us to accomplish these things. And then he shows us the greatest reward even of our developing these fruit of the Spirit, and this one of faithfulness. Notice here he says, do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. As we started this series, we noted that God's promises are not necessarily that life will not have any trials, or that there won't be any turbulent times, or there won't be heartache, or there won't be pain, whether physical or emotional. But nonetheless, he tells us that we can beat that in life. Everyone faces those kinds of things. And he says that he can equip us to help us so that we can remain trustworthy to him, so that we can be faithful even unto death, as we saw there. And in that, then, he says, we would receive the crown of life. Notice here then as well, Jesus in Matthew chapter 25 and 21 is quoted as saying, his Lord said to him, in speaking a parable, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. We notice that under the fruit of the Spirit, the joy that we get to participate in, and that joy that we anticipate in eternity, is the Lord's. And he's willing to share that with us, isn't he? And we see then that he shares that with those that he develops his character in of reliability. of faithfulness that we can enter into that joy. So God assures us that the means of faithfulness is available and that we can access it, and the Spirit can produce it in us. Just one closing promise that would help give us assurance of this, we might note from 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and in verse 13. He says, "There hath no temptation taken you but such as man can bear. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation make also the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." Let us take full advantage of God's work to keep us faithful. Let this be a product of the Spirit in our life.